Hello, you're watching Implementing Plaid in Bubble.io. This is about how to set up your Plaid link and the Plaid plugin initially in your Bubble app. This version applies to plugins version 10.0 and higher. If you're using an older version than that, I suggest either upgrading or checking out the older videos on my channel. My name is Brian Alderman. I'm the owner and principal of Lost Sheep Advisory. We're a boutique no-code consulting firm that specializes in financial and business operations solutions. We developed this Plaid plugin that you're using and are also experts in payments and open banking integrations. You can learn more about us at lostsheep.dev and reach out via email for free plugin support, as well as check out our website to book time for on-demand Bubble office hours, engage us to work on your projects to execute your vision, or bring fractional CTO leadership to help you own your no-code application and bring your application to the next level. In this video, we're going to cover how to set up the Plaid plugin in your app. We'll let your users connect a bank account. We'll show you how to save those bank account details for future use, and we'll establish a basic infrastructure for webhooks that will be needed for future videos. Other videos already on my channel, and more to come in the future, involve use cases like obtaining transactions, conducting payments, getting account balances, other common errors, income verification. All the different features that Plaid offers are supported by this plugin. And again, if anything's not quite working out for you, feel free to email us at info@lostsheep.dev. One thing I will say before we dive too much further into Plaid Link here is that Plaid is probably one of the harder integrations you can do into Bubble. This assumes a baseline knowledge of understanding of how Bubble works. I'm not going to go into some of the nitty-gritty details here. So please make sure you're familiar with Bubble before you get too deep into here. Some key terms we're going to see as we go through this Plaid integration. Plaid Link. You'll hear me refer to. This is specifically the screens that Plaid pops up that allow your user to access their accounts and link them to your application. That's the whole experience that Plaid owns. It's not Bubble screens, it's Plaid screens, so we'll see that. We're going to be creating things called link tokens. These are the keys that let you open a Plaid link session. They tell the Plaid link session and the Plaid settings how to behave for your user, so we'll see some different options as we go through here about how to set up those link tokens. Plaid creates institutions, the term they use. This is for a bank or financial institution like a Chase connection or a Bank of America connection. Those are at the institution level for your user. And then there will be accounts inside of that. We'll see a diagram of that in just a second here. And then each of those institutions has an item ID, which is the unique identifier. Each time a user connects their accounts to your application, you'll get a new item ID for each institution that a user has shared. That references a user's login and data sharing permissions for that particular institution. Those item IDs are going to be important as we look through the application. And then there's also an access token. This is the result of that Plaid link process. This is what's used for all of the future actions with Plaid for that item ID. So the access token is your way that you get transactions, account details, etc. To do anything else with that linked account, you're going to need that access token. So some key terms that you'll see as we go through this. Something else to be aware of as we conceptually as we go through this tutorial is some of the key data types we're going to be working with here. This is not the only data model that you can use, and your application will vary. But the way I'm going to set it up here is that each user will have one or more institutions. Again, that's like the Chases, the Bank of Americas of the world. That institution's where that item ID and access token lives, as we talked about just a second ago. And then each institution can have one or more account in it. So this could be like a checking account, a savings account, a credit card, all at Chase Bank, all for user Bob. Right, so that's the way that works. We'll also be creating link tokens. Those tie to users, directly appear, and then we'll be talking about Plaid webhooks. So there's going to be 5 data types that we're working with in this video. Just wanted to give you a pictorial way of seeing that. So what's the process we're going to be building in order to connect bank accounts to your app? There are 4 steps to it that we're going to work through. The first step is creating a link token. We're going to then go ahead and pass that to Plaid and open up the Plaid link experience for your user to interact with. Once that link experience is done, the user will be sent back to your application. You'll be given a public token. That public token then needs to get exchanged with Plaid for an access token, and that access token will be used for all of the future API requests. So that's broadly what we're doing, and we'll come back and reference this as we go through. So let's get in and start building. I'm working in my test app here, just for sake of demonstration, but you can also check out lostsheep.dev/plaidlink. All of these steps that we're going to go through are documented on here with some screenshots that you can look at for examples of how to set it up in your application, as well as a button to view this entire app in edit mode so you can look at the different workflows and copy them into your application yourself. They are a little bit different here in this test app because it's set up to try to be generic and has all of our different use cases built into one. So you won't see... We are covering a small subset of what is set up in this application and this detailed documentation in this video, so they won't quite match, but it is a good reference for you to go in and take a look at. So the first step we need to do is set up our plugin. Once you have subscribed to the plugin, I'll throw a link in the description, you can go ahead and configure it in your application. On the plugin page, you'll see the Plaid plugin, and we need to go in and set up our environments, client IDs, and secrets. So environment is just which Plaid environment you're talking to. For the sake of demos and for your development purposes, I recommend using Sandbox. The other options here are development and production. You can get to those later. But for now, go ahead and put Sandbox in the environment field. I also recommend doing that for all the fields that are -dev, right down here. This is just saying, hey Plaid, talk to the Sandbox environment for both your live app and your development app. I always recommend doing your development against Sandbox, right? Never really put development or production data here in dev. Just have that list of Sandbox. Then you're going to need your client ID and your secret. These are mine. Don't use mine. You want to go into your Plaid dashboard. So I'm at dashboard.plaid.com. Under Team Settings and Keys, you can find your client ID and the Sandbox secret token. And if you copy that in and throw it into your client ID and secret fields here, it will work properly. One thing I see people do sometimes is accidentally have trailing spaces or leading spaces in these fields. Those will break the plugin, so make sure you're not doing that. Once that is configured, there's a couple other things we can do over in this Plaid dashboard to change the way your users experience Plaid. Under the Customize page is where those options are, and you can check out all the different features here under Customize. You can do things like changing the background color of your Plaid experience to try to match more of the branding experience of your application and give users a more seamless approach. You can also change the way your logo appears in here. The one I want to call attention to, though, is this data transparency messaging. This is a beta feature that Plaid's rolling out that will sometime soon be required for all new apps. So I recommend just turning this on today. The plugin already supports it, and I think it leads to a really nice user experience here. So I suggest coming into data transparency messaging and enabling this feature. It creates this kind of view, a simple explanation of what data your user is sharing with your application that's become the best practice in open banking circles. So highly suggest you go in and turn that on for your application. The other thing I would refer you to here under this Customize screen is Account Select. Depending on your use case, you can set up PlaidLink to let your user select only one account at a time. So see this changed to radio buttons, so only one account is selected. This is good for things like payment use cases. You can let users select multiple accounts. This is the default and what I most often see used. This is letting them select one or more accounts, as well as a select all button in here. So people can choose which accounts to connect to your app. Or for some personal finance applications, you may want to just have a user select all accounts at a given institution without the option to deselect any. But I, most of the time, keep it as enabled to multiple accounts. So there's a couple different settings you can look at here in that Customize menu to change how the experience in PlaidLink works for your user base. Once that's all done, and the plugin is configured correctly in your plugin page, we can get to building. So I have a page set up on my test app. This is my PlaidLink page. This is where I'm going to ask the user to connect to the bank account. Put that in your app wherever it belongs, right? And very simply, this is just going to be a button press. So I'm going to tell a user, I might have some additional information I would put on this page to say, hey, here's what we're going to do, here's what I'm going to ask you to do, connect your bank account. That's kind of the standard thing, is to add some copy here explaining what you're going to have a user do once they click this button. And then we need to set up workflows for Plaid upon this link bank account button. So I'm just going to click Start Workflow here and start a workflow for when this link bank account is clicked. You'll remember earlier we talked about this need to start with the key, the Plaid link token. So the first thing we're going to do is create a link token. There it is, create link token. And we're going to walk through all the different fields in this create link token step because there's a lot of them, and this will change the way your app behaves and what your user sees as they go through here. So let's start at the top with the app name. You'll want to put in, obviously, your app name there, whatever that may be. Then there's a user ID. This is a unique user ID for your bubble user. It's not recommended to send PII in here, so I usually do current user's unique ID. Because that ends up being something that if you needed to go into Plaid's logs, you could look it up and correlate it back to your database without sharing sensitive information that you don't necessarily need to share. So I usually do current user's unique ID. You can pick the language that Plaid link will appear in. I'm going to leave that as English, but there's a couple other options in there. Then we get into the callback URL. Callback URLs is the way Plaid will share information back with your app asynchronously. So a lot of open banking happens asynchronously. So we need this. This is also called a webhook. Right? So we need to go set up our webhook. Those happen in backend workflows. If you don't see your backend workflow tab, make sure you go enable them. It's under Settings and API, Enable Backend Workflows. So in my backend workflows, I just need to create my new API workflow, Plaid Webhook. It's going to be public. It's going to be able to run without authentication. We'll talk more about those things in a minute. And I'm going to set it up to detect requested data. And I'm going to hit this detect data button real quick. Copy that field. We're going to need it in a second. You are going to see an app error at this point. Don't worry about it. We'll come back and fix it here in a minute. And then I'm going to go back to that Plaid link page and take that URL that I just copied and put it right there. Oops. I think mine only partially copied. Let's try that again. I can do this as many times as I need, right? So there it goes. Now it's copying the whole thing all the way through the /initialize. And if I go back to Plaid link, let's try that again. There we go. Now the whole thing copied in. It's the URL for my app. It's in the version test mode, and the webhook initialize. One thing I'll often do here to future-proof myself and make sure that this is going to continue working once I promote to live is instead of hard-coding this entire URL in here, I'll come to the / after version test, delete everything before it, so now it just starts API, and I will insert the dynamic data website home URL, which will know if it's version test or version live of my app so that I don't need to manually change this each time. So that's something I'll usually do is the website home URL followed by API, no / in between the two, and the rest of that webhook that we just copied. And we'll come back to this in a little while. The next piece of this is called the redirect URI. This has to do with a process called OAuth that is required to use with Plaid. A lot of banks will use this OAuth flow. And what it will do is allow an experience where a user might go from your app to the bank app, like a Chase app. The user will give permission to your app to get data from the bank there, and then it will take them back to this redirect URI page in order to get the user back into your application. So we need to set up here what that redirect URL is going to be. I usually recommend that this be a dedicated page in your application. So I've already created one here. It's the OAuth page. You can create one. You'll notice that this page doesn't have a whole ton on it. It's just big giant OAuth page, please wait. Right? For now, that's how we're going to leave it. We'll come back and actually implement this page in a little bit. For the time being, though, in that workflow for create link token, we're going to do the same thing, website home URL, and say OAuth page, the name of that page that I just created, so that this redirect URL is where my user will go when they are redirected. Redirect URLs have to be configured in your Plaid dashboard as well for security reasons. So it's not enough to just put this redirect URL here in the Bubble app. We actually have to come into our Plaid dashboard, go into Team Settings and API, and find this section called Allowed Redirect URIs. And under that Allowed Redirect URIs, we'll go into Configure, and you need to add the URL of your application here. I already have mine on my clipboard because I copied it earlier, and I just need to replace the API part from the end to be the OAuth page, right? But you need to put your URL in here. Maybe that's your appname.bubbleapps.io. Maybe it's, if you have a custom domain set up, it'll be something different. You'll need both version test and without version test in order for this to work later, and then OAuth page at the end. So this needs to match exactly what we put in the app here, but know that this, I used a variable here, website home URL. So it needs to be the value that will evaluate to. You can also check, if you go to the OAuth page and just hit preview here, right? You can just take this URL without the debug mode at the end, right? So you can take this URL by previewing that OAuth page we created a minute ago, and put it right in that field in your Plaid settings. It'll ask you for your password. And save that. So you've got to be able to do that if you are getting errors about the OAuth, or if you're seeing errors later about OAuth redirect URLs, it's because you didn't do that step correctly. So it's a good thing to go in and check. So back in that create link token step, we've done our redirect URL, and now we can move on to the different countries. Select the country you want for your products. There's a bunch of information here about other countries that Plaid is working on and how selecting multiple countries can affect which products are available. I'd encourage you to check out Plaid's documentation for that. We're not going to get too deeply into that. I'm just going to leave this as United States for now, so only US banks will show up in Plaid Link. And then we get down into the Plaid products. It's recommended here, and we talk about this a little bit, and I recommend you check out this link on Plaid's docs, to only include the products that you strictly need for your application at first. So in this case, I'm going to pretend we're using transactions product for now, and we're going to leave the other ones as don't include. And what this will do is ask your user for consent to share transactional data with your application, and you'll be able to use transaction products later on. We talked earlier about data transparency messaging, and if you turned that on, that new feature has an additional mode called consent only. So let's say I set up my Plaid link to get transactions only. If I later realize I want to do payments and need to actually get the routing and account numbers of my customer, if I have this set to don't include, I'll need to come back through Plaid link again with this set to initialize now in order to get that information. If I just try to ask for the auth information, the routing and bank account number, it won't work. So if you have multiple use cases but you don't necessarily want to start them all immediately, you can set them to consent only mode. And Plaid will ask for consent for those products without fully initializing them now, but you'll be able to initialize them later. Again, if that's not all making sense to you, I suggest checking out the docs on Plaid's site about when to initialize products and how that data transparency messaging affects it. It's a pretty complicated feature set, but for now, just to get Plaid Link working, we're going to set this up as transactions initialize now and leave everything else as don't include. We're just going to worry about transactions. Further down towards the bottom, there's some stuff about account filtering. We're going to ignore that for now. There's a lot more features that you can put in here about which accounts you let users to connect and not. And then there's some stuff down here about Plaid update mode. We're not going to cover that right now either. Check out other videos about Plaid Link Advanced and item errors to understand how this all works. So we have set up our Plaid link to create a link token with these settings. Then we just need to save that link token. So I'm going to create a new thing. I already have Plaid link token set up in my database. You'll notice I added 3 fields. If I look under data types, I just set up an error message expires at as a date and a token as a text. It's going to be created by whoever the current user is. So on my workflow, I could just create this Plaid link token, and I'm going to set these the way you would expect. So they're just going to be the result of step one's expiration, result of step one's token, result of step one's error message. And then the final step here is I need to actually start Plaid link. And to start Plaid link, I need to go grab the Plaid link element back on my page and take this Plaid link element and put it somewhere on my page. I'm going to put it right up there for now. It can be small, so I'm just going to make it like a one-by-one thing, but it does need to appear on my page somewhere. And once that's on the page, under element actions, you'll see Plaid link, and I can start Plaid link. Select the Plaid link element I just added, use the link token that I created in step one. Received redirect URI stays blank. We'll use that in a few minutes when we talk about the OAuth page. And then I am going to do one other thing. I'm going to say here, if result of step one returned an error was yes, or was no, then do this. So only do this if result of step one didn't return an error. And then maybe I would set up some sort of error messaging to say if there was an error, show it to the user here. Right? So I might say, one second. There we go. So I might trigger an error alert. I just used a plugin here. This is not a required step, and you can do this however works for your app. I'm just doing a error alert plugin, error with Plaid link token creation, right? And I might set this up if result of step one returned an error is yes, so that I get both a happy path and a sad path, right? So there was an error, there wasn't an error. Just one potential suggestion. Again, your application will dictate what you need to do here about error handling. But for now, let's make sure that this worked. So I can go back into preview mode, and we're going to connect a bank account. Just come over to preview mode and just click the button where we set up that workflow. And it will create that Plaid link token, save it to my database. So if I come over here and look at data, right, here's that link token that created successfully, and it used it to start that new Plaid link. And I can go through the process here of, actually let me pick a different bank for reasons we'll talk about here in a minute. And I can go through the process here of adding a bank account. If you look at the bottom, when you're in sandbox mode, it tells you what the username and password are, user good, pass good, in order to get through successfully. And I can pick all or some, because of the way we set this up, right? All or some of these accounts to link to my app, and it will give me a success message, and we'll have set that up successfully. So, now that we've done that, we need to make sure that we correctly handle a successful link token setup and actually do something with the data, because so far we just connected an account, but we lost all the information associated with it because we haven't set up anything to happen to it. So back in my application in the workflows, we're going to set up a Plaid link is successful error. So I'm going to go up, or set Plaid link is successful workflow. So I'm going to come up here to a Plaid link is successful, or to events, and add an element event, a Plaid link is successful. And this will fire whenever a bank account is successfully linked. And we're going to do a couple different things here. The first thing we need to do is exchange a public token, Plaid exchange public token. And if you remember back from our process up here, we've done step one, we created that link token, we went through the link process. Now we're on step three. We need to exchange this public token for an item ID and an access token. So that's what we're going to do in this workflow. We exchange the public token, we take in this Plaid link's Plaid public token, and this will spit back out a item ID and an access token. Those are things that we're going to want to save as a new institution, because that's what a user just did, is they connected a new institution. So I already have a data type here, Plaid institution. You'll notice it's got a couple fields. They're all just text, access token, institution name, institution ID, and item ID. And I'm going to grab those values and save them to my database so that I can use them in the future. So this is, the access token is result of step one's access token. The item ID is a result of step 1's item ID. And then I use this Plaid link, which will also tell me in here the institution ID. And this Plaid link will also tell me the institution name. So I can save that information to my database. So now I've created, I think in the example we just looked at, we connected Chime, right? So this will create a Chime record in my database in the institution table. For the sake of this demo, the next thing I'm going to do is display data in my repeating group, and I've set up my repeating group here to show this see it in action group, the group initiate Plaid link here. I've set it up so that that will be the institution that I just linked. This probably doesn't make sense for your particular use case, right? Because you'll want to save this and show it to your users somehow differently. Maybe you'll want to store this institution list on the user table. So that's often something I'll do is here, like make a change to current user, and I'll store an institution list and add result of step 2. And instead of doing this display group initiate Plaid link, I'll just show a user's institutions in a repeating group on my page so that they see that. But for sake of this example, I'm just going to use this display data in group. From there are a couple of things that we can do. Because we've saved the institution level data, right? So we've saved this record. We also might have multiple accounts going on. So there are a couple ways we can handle that. One way is just by, I have a repeating group on my page here, and I just want to show the user what accounts they've connected, right? So I might say here, bank account details body account, and in a repeating group, and I would get data from an external API. Plaid account details. I want parent group's institutions access token, so that's the thing we just saved and we just set here. And then I'm going to have this be Plaid bank account details body accounts, and this is going to be literally a list of accounts that will show up in my application whenever a user links them. Oops. Plaid bank account details body account. There we go. And then I can have it list something like the official name and maybe the mask, or let's actually do a subtype and capitalized words. So we'll see that in a second as one approach to how I can list the different accounts. You might, though, want to actually save because this is getting them off of the API. I'm making another API call every time this page loads, and getting the data from Plaid directly. You might also want to save these accounts into your database so that you can create the data structure that I talked about here. How would we do that? Well, it's a list of accounts. We would want to probably set up a backend workflow that is a new API workflow called create account. And this might take in the, let's just say, institution, because I want to know which institution this account belongs to. Maybe I'd give it the account name, account mask, which is the partial masked account number, account type, account subtype. I'm just going to do those couple fields for now. There's additional ones that you'll see here in a minute that you could use. I'll leave that to your app to decide what to do here. Oops. And then all I need to do here is create a new thing, and I'm going to create a Plaid account. You'll notice there's a bunch of fields that I had grabbed already, and I would just do filling in the details that I passed in there. Oh, and there's one other field that we need here, account ID, which is Plaid's unique identifier for this account. So I just created an API workflow that creates Plaid accounts, right? And I will add that in the Plaid account successful workflow. I will schedule an API workflow on a list. And I'll go find that same bank account details body account API call, because we want to get data from an external API. We're we're going to do that Plaid bank account details API using results of step 1's access token. So that access token is the key to everything, as we talked about earlier. And then the accounts here, we're going to run that create account workflow now, and this is going to go through and say result of step 2 is the institution we created, and then we'll do this bank account details body accounts name, this bank account details mask, this bank account details type, and this bank account details subtype, and this bank account details account ID. So you'll notice here there were a bunch of other fields I could get, including things like balances, currency codes. I'm just grabbing these for the sake of example here, but you could add additional ones to your app as needed. And this workflow will run and create a record of each account in my database whenever I link a new bank. So how would we see that in our app? Let me go ahead and add a new repeating group to my page here. So the first one's going to be the API data. The second one here I will change to be a Plaid account type from my database. And I'll just do a search for accounts. Oops, I think this actually isn't a repeating group. One second. Let's make that actually a repeating group. There we go. Handle some of the responsiveness here. And I could say that this is this account's name and account's subtype. Similar to how we did it before. Let me fix some of the responsiveness here. There we go, 50-50. So let's see that all in action now that we have created a way to display two different ways to display bank account data on my pages and to save that institution into the database and to save the accounts into the database. So I'll again go through this link bank account flow, and we'll see it in action. Let me pick a different one this time. How about Vero Bank? Again, user underscore good, pass underscore good when I'm in sandbox mode. Pick a couple accounts. I picked 3 of them. We'll say that that's successful. The workflow we set up a second ago will run. I need to go upgrade my Bubble app to do that. Give me 1 second. Alright, I just had to go change a setting in my Bubble app to make sure that I'm on a plan that allows workflows. You can't be on the free plan to do backend workflows like this, so I just had to go upgrade my Bubble app. And just did the same thing, went through the Plaid bank account, and you'll see what just happened here. Right, so I have the institution that we created in that workflow. I have the get data from external API values here, the top half that's just pulling from the Plaid API if you didn't want to save them for some reason. And then down below, I have a do a search for accounts in my database, pulling up those different accounts. If I look in my database here, we have institutions showing up here. There it is. It's saving the institution. It's got that item ID, which will become relevant here in a minute when we talk about webhooks. It's saving the institution name. It's saving that access token. And then in accounts, it created 1 record per account of each of these accounts. It's saving the institution here and the account IDs, etc. And we're able to see those on the page. So we have Plaid working on our application. Now there are a couple other things we need to do. The first thing we are going to go in and do is finish implementing our OAuth flows. So you remember in my create link token step, we set up this redirect URL. The way this works is if Plaid needs to take you to another page, it'll send the user back to this website, this OAuth page to complete the Plaid flow. So on that page, we're going to need to duplicate this Plaid link is successful flow in the case when someone goes through that approach. So what I'm just going to do is copy this entire workflow, this Plaid link on successful workflow, and we're going to end up pasting it onto our OAuth page. Now, that's not necessarily a best practice, right? One thing I'll often do is I'll put all of this Plaid stuff inside a reusable element as custom events, and I'll trigger them there, but I'll leave that exercise to you, the user, to figure out if that's the way you want to architect your application. So let me go over to my OAuth page, and we need to do a couple things to make this OAuth page work. First, we need to go put a Plaid link element onto this page. And then I need to paste, as I said earlier, that Plaid link is successful action so that all the same stuff happens when a user gets to this page after linking their account instead of staying on my Plaid link page. And then the final thing I'll do here is go to page, and I'll take them back to where they belong in my application once all of this is successful. I also don't have that group in there that I was setting that state to earlier, so I'll get rid of that. So same idea here. I'm exchanging the public token, creating the institution, making changes to the user to add that institution, creating the accounts, and then I'm going to take the user back where they started. This is just a different place where a user may wind up when they have successfully linked their account. So when they do wind up on this page, we need to trigger something else. We need to start a new event. I usually do this on page load. When a user comes to this page on page load, we'll want to try setting up their Plaid link. So we'll do a start Plaid link. And then, very important, you need to pass the same link token they started with here. So this is why it's important to store who created the link token so that you can get the most recent one. It's got to be the exact same token. So here I'm just going to do Plaid link token, where created by equals current users, and I'll just do the first item here, right? And maybe I'll sort this by expires, descending yes. And then I need the token. So that's a way that I'm getting, in my particular case here, the link token that I need. You can set your app up differently, of course, right? However you authenticate your users can affect this. And however you set up your privacy rules in your app can affect this. You just need to make sure you get the same link token that you initially started with back in the Plaid link page. Hopefully that makes sense in a second. Then in this case, instead of leaving received redirect URL blank, we're actually going to say this URL here. We just need to pass the entire URL of whatever this page is into Plaid so that it works successfully. So let's see what OAuth looks like in action. Yeah, so let's see Plaid link in action with OAuth. So two different OAuth flows that you may experience. When I click link bank account, certain banks will use OAuth and certain ones will not. Generally, Sandbox will work the same way as it will in production, so you can get a good sense of that. The first bank that I'll pick, these top three, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Chase, all use OAuth. So if I pick Chase, right, it goes through this same screen, and then you'll get, instead of the username and password page, you'll get this authenticate with Chase. After you select this, you'll be taken to Chase. And what will happen when I'm here in a desktop browser is a new window will open up. I hope you can see that here. And it'll be purple, this first platypus bank, and I can proceed through here the same way, user good, pass good, and go all the way through that. I think I just hit the simulate error button by accident, but I could try that again. And you can just hit the purple buttons and go straight through here. You don't have to fill anything out until you get to the selecting accounts, just a tip for Sandbox. And I can hit the purple buttons and I'm going to connect 3 accounts. And then it works the exact same way it does before. So the Plaid link will show a success on your page, and you won't be taken to that OAuth page. It works exactly the way we showed a minute ago, where I'm creating those accounts in my database here. I'm pulling from the API, exact same as we saw before. That's what will happen in a desktop situation. The OAuth page really comes into play only when you're using a mobile scenario, and this could be in a native mobile app if you're using some sort of wrapper with Bubble, or opening up in a mobile browser on your phone. And Plaid link knows which way to go without you doing anything, and will work a little bit differently. So in order to test your OAuth flow, you actually have to force your page to look like it's in mobile. So you could do this test on your mobile device, or you can just go into inspect mode in your browser and change to using this responsive viewer device toolbar, right? I can tell my application that I'm on a mobile device, like an iPhone 12 Pro, right? And now I can go through that Plaid link flow again, and you'll see that it behaves a little bit differently here. When I link my bank account here, Plaid link will show up. It takes over the whole screen because you're no longer in a desktop flow. And if this time I link Chase, now watch my URL at the top. Instead of, hold on, Instead of staying in my application, now I'm actually on a different website, and this would be chase.com, for instance, if it was Chase Bank. When we're in Sandbox, it's just Plaid's own pages. But this could take you into the Chase app. It could take you somewhere else. And you'll be asked to authenticate. Again, it's just user good, pass good. And I can proceed through here. You can type in whatever you need in these fields when it's this First Platypus Bank, and it will work. I can pick my accounts. Let me pick just the credit card and the CD this time, for example, and complete going through this flow. And then you'll notice that it takes me back to, this time, my OAuth page. You saw that there real quick. It'll pop open Plaid link again. If that's successful and worked correctly, it will show that to the user, and I'll be on that Plaid link page. We'll go through the workflow, and remember, at the end of our workflow, we actually send ourselves back to the Plaid link page. We're taken right back here, and the new accounts are created. And I could check my database again, right, and see, hey, here's the credit card account that I just linked. Here's the Chase account that I just linked. Right, so that's how you could test that OAuth flow. Is you've got to make sure you're in a mobile device, which you can simulate in your browser using that inspect mode. So there's how we set up OAuth. I think I already mentioned, but I do highly suggest you put all of this Plaid stuff in a reusable element and use custom events. That's beyond the scope of this video, but it can make it a little easier so that you have important logic here that may change depending on your application's use case, right? And you won't have to repeat yourself, is the key. So I did it, just duplicated on the Plaid link page and the OAuth page for sake of this example. You could do it better in your own application. So that's OAuth. We've seen how this worked in a desktop and in a mobile scenario. You do need both. You have to handle both because you don't know where your user will be. So once that is all set up, you're good to go on the OAuth front. The last thing we need to do is finish setting up our webhooks. So as I said earlier, open banking is a very asynchronous activity. Sometimes things will happen, like transactional updates will happen, and Plaid needs a way to tell your application about them, which is why when we set up our create link token, we set up this callback URL. So we just need to finish setting up that callback URL so that we can successfully get information back from Plaid. The way we do that's using Bubble's initialize mode. You'll see we've had this error hanging out up here. We're going to go fix this now, this please reinitialize to detect the fields. The way we do that is we'll go into our backend workflows to Plaid webhook, where we had this detect request data. We're going to put it in detect mode here so that you see this detect requested data. This needs to be up on your screen with this blue, hey, we're waiting for information circle. And then I'm going to go do exactly what we did a minute ago. I'll refresh my preview of the app, and I will link another bank account. And by linking another bank account, specifically linking another bank account here with that transaction mode, if you remember earlier, that transaction mode fires bank account, fires details. Other ones don't, so I recommend starting with that transaction mode so that you can complete this step. Otherwise, it can get a little more difficult. But if you're following the video, this will work for you. Select those bank accounts. We'll see it's successfully linked, and if I come back in here, in a second here, we will see this webhook get initialized. There we go. Plaid just sent data to my webhook, and I can see that it has environments, error, item ID, new transactions, webhook code, webhook type. I'm just going to save those all as their data type, and now I'll be able to use them in the future, and we'll cover how to actually handle these webhooks in a future video. But now at least you are able to receive them in your application, and we have set up Plaid Link successfully. The last thing we need to do is, because we have now successfully initialized it, we just need to take the word initialize out of my Plaid Link setup, because we're no longer initializing, we're just trying to call the webhook directly for future banks. With that, your Plaid Link is all set to go, and you can move on to implementing whatever features your application will use around transactions or authorization, income verification, etc. But we've just shown you how to get a basic bank account linked to your application. Check out the other videos for more details there. The last thing I want to cover before we review what we did is to talk briefly about privacy rules. Very, very, very important. I've not covered privacy rules here in detail. You'll notice these are publicly visible in my test app here. I strongly do not recommend that. You really should not be leaving this data publicly visible. You should be defining a new rule. It's like user owner and saying things like current users institutions contains this Plaid institution. Your mileage here may vary. This is not the only way to do it, but I've removed default permission and given only this current user permission to view their institutions. You can look at other videos out in the internet and other bubble reference docs for more about privacy rules. I don't want to give a specific recommendation here about privacy rules. That's beyond the scope of this video, but it is very important that you set up appropriate privacy rules to protect the data for your application. So we'll leave it at that for now. Other videos will cover more of this stuff later. So just to review what we did here, we have now let a user connect their bank account to your app through Plaid. We did that through a couple different workflows, one tied to this bank account and then one waiting for the result of that action from Plaid. We also went ahead and set up the OAuth flows and your OAuth page to handle those cases where a user's in a mobile type scenario and goes through that OAuth flow. We've saved the bank account details to your database in two different tables, right? We created institutions, which are the bank level, and have the critical information here about the access token and the item ID that you'll need for every future use case that you set up Plaid with. We've saved the bank account details in that Plaid accounts table, so you've got account IDs, account names, subtypes. There's other data you could grab here. We just showed a couple for sake of example. And then we initialized your webhooks successfully and connected the dots between creating that link token with this callback URL and initializing your backend, initializing your backend workflow, the Plaid webhook here, using that detect data mode that we will come back to in future videos. So I encourage you to check out other videos in the channel. Reach out, info@lostsheep.dev. If anything comes up, I'll be happy to help via email. Thank you so much for watching, and happy building.